with the housekeeping details. Thank you for joining the Washtenaw County Road Commission for our August the 4th virtual working session. Before we start the session, there are a few housekeeping items I would like to cover. And the first thing is housekeeping details, click the button. Okay. Am I being loud enough for everybody to understand?
Yes.
Thank you. Number one, if you would like to make public comment during this meeting, we will prompt you at the appropriate time in the agenda to virtually raise your hand. If you're viewing the meeting on your computer, first make sure to click Join Audio. You can then raise your hand by clicking the Participants button at the bottom of your screen, and then the Raise Hand button at the bottom right of your screen. If you dialed into our meeting from your touchtone phone, you can virtually raise your hand by pressing *9. Once we get to the public comment section on the agenda, we will unmute participants with raised hands one at a time. The chat feature on this Zoom meeting is available only as technical support for users on their computers or smartphones. If you're experiencing technical issues with audio or video during the meeting, submit a comment in the chat feature and our systems manager will help you troubleshoot. The audio and video of this meeting is being recorded. A link to the video will be posted to WCRoads.org in the coming days. Today's meeting agenda is posted on WCRoads.org, and there is a link available in the chat if you are joining us from your computer. At this point, I'll call the meeting to order, and we will start the meeting with a roll call for attendance. I'm Chairman of the Board, Doug Fuller. Barb Fuller, are you there?
Present.
Good morning, Barb.
Good morning, Doug.
Commissioner Green.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning again. Gloria Yamas.
Here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And Joanne McCullum.
Present.
Thank you. Good morning, Joanne.
Morning.
I've seen Cheryl. Good morning. Matt, are you there? McDonald?
Yes. Present.
Okay. Director of Operations, Mr. Harmon.
Present.
Good morning, Jim. Director of Finance and IT, Mr. Ackerman.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning, Daniel. Okay. We are now at the point of public comment. If you would like to make a public comment, please virtually raise your hand at this point. If you are viewing the meeting on your computer, first make sure to click Join Audio. You can then raise your hand by clicking the Participants button at the bottom of your screen, and then the Raise Hand button at the bottom right of your screen. If you dialed into the meeting from your touchtone telephone, you can virtually raise your hand at this point by dialing *9. The meeting host, Emily, will unmute participants with raised hands one at a time. The host will announce your username or the last 4 digits of your phone number when it is your turn to speak. As with all of our meetings, well, this is a time to receive comments from the public. It is not intended to be a period for dialogue. Each person will be allocated 3 minutes to address the board. Emily, do we have anyone who would like to address the board at this point?
At this time, Commissioner, there is no one with a raised hand.
Okay, thank you. On the agenda, we're going to begin our agenda with a conversation about some proposed bylaws for the commission. And I'll ask the managing director to lead that discussion. Cheryl?
Sure. Thank you. Good morning. This morning we have Marjorie Dixon joining us once again. At the last working session, when we were talking about the ability or the desire to continue to have remote meetings, or at least some form of remote attendance at meetings, part of the discussion also came up that we would need to amend our bylaws in order to allow for that provision. moving forward. This is, of course, assuming that at some point the executive orders that do allow us to have open or virtual meetings under the Open Meetings Act, eventually those executive orders will expire. And we are making the assumption that we will be then resuming business under the traditional Open Meetings Act. So again, as part of that discussion previously, it was the recommendation that we amend our bylaws so that it's clear how this board intends to function moving forward and allowing that as a permissible way of conducting business, again, all pursuant to the Open Meetings Act. So as part of that last discussion, we had requested that Margie take a look at the current bylaws and then also a proposed set of bylaws that had been previously developed quite a while ago in the past. So what was distributed as part of the working session agenda was a proposed set of bylaws that she has put together. And embedded within that were certainly some comments as well for discussion, but we thought that it would be helpful to go through the bylaws as proposed so that we are incorporating any comments, changes, thoughts, so that as hopefully as we're moving forward under a new set of bylaws that it's all clear as to what we're doing and how we intend to conduct our business. So Margie, I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to add at that point or if we just start looking at the document itself.
Right, I think we can go through the document. I think we probably don't want to go through each and every section or that will take up your entire working session. So I'm not sure how you want to handle it. I'm sure you distributed a copy of the proposed bylaws with the agenda meeting. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to review them. So maybe we could go through page by page and address any comments or questions that the commissioners have on those
Yep, and I do have the ability, I'd like to share my screen so that everybody's looking if that's helpful. And then my thought was if there are changes that are ultimately made, I'd be happy to make them and everyone can actually see the language as they're being edited at the time, if that works.
Great.
So let's see if I am successful in being able to do that this time. All right, can everyone see the bylaws at this point?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
So Margie, if you wouldn't mind leading us in this discussion?
Sure. I mean, what we have gone from is a sort of a one-page list of guidelines to a more full-blown set of bylaws to provide for the governance of the Board of Road Commissioners. So Article 1 talks about what the board is, what it's composed of, what a quorum is, and that we transact all business under the Open Meetings Act, you know, the rules regarding conflicts of interest. I guess that's it for Article 1. Did anybody have any questions or concerns regarding Article 1?
I'm
You're
happy.
muted, Gloria. So I don't know if everyone had the opportunity to read these. I did not. So I don't want to blow through them.
Okay.
I do have some questions. So I don't know what happened, Cheryl, but bylaws disappeared. So I can pull up my own.
Did they disappear?
I still
I did have some questions.
Okay, I'm confused. Can others see it or is it just Gloria or,
I can see it.
Can see them fine.
okay.
I
See
can
your
see them.
screen, Cheryl, just fine.
Okay,
Okay.
so maybe I need to change my view option. There we go.
If it's helpful, in my own personal thought is if we listen to the presentation, and I would expect very much that another working session would probably be in this topic could be at another working session so that the commissioners will have time to listen to the presentation, write down their questions. They can even share those with the managing director in the meantime. And at another working session, we would discuss any questions that are still remaining. Because if we wait forever, we'll never get through it. So I would think perhaps the way forward here would simply be to listen to our attorney's presentation of these bylaws. And then whether it's the next working session in 2 weeks or whether it's a month away, we've been doing adequately without these bylaws for somewhat over 100 years. So I don't think they have to be adopted this week or next week. So that would be my recommendation personally.
Okay.
Well,
That
my
sounds-
only question on that is going to be that, I mean, certainly we want these to be well thought out and for comments to be incorporated and discussed absolutely so that everybody's comfortable. If we reach the point where this executive order expires, we will not have the ability to potentially to hold a virtual meeting or have remote attendance at a meeting. So it is likely that in September, we would be required to meet in person if everything expires in the manner in which it could right now.
Good, yeah. And that's a very valid point. That's, I guess, not the highest on my list of priorities because I do not want the commissioners to feel under pressure that we have to do something this week or next. I take the point, Cheryl. If we have to have a meeting where we have to be in person, then we can probably make that sort of an arrangement. But I'm not trying to push the board in any direction. It's just my thoughts.
So through the chair, I have no problem with Article 1, but as we go through these articles, I'll try and read them as quickly as I can. And I pulled up Marjorie's notes because what you sent to us, I started going through prior to the meeting. So I have no issue with Article 1, but I do agree with Doug that we can go through all of these and see where we land. But if I don't feel comfortable voting on it, you know, I'll take that lead. I don't
Well,
foresee.
This working session cannot adopt anything anyway.
Right.
I would envision that the very earliest that we could actually do something with these would be the second meeting of August, which is the 18th. And we're expected to have a working session that day as well. So we'll have at least one more shot at this before we could possibly consider it anyway. So if we're okay with Marjorie going on with her presentation, let's do so.
Yes.
So do we want to go back through Article 1 in a little more detail? I don't know how much time on the agenda we have devoted to this, to the bylaws review, so.
And right now it's on the agenda for an hour.
Oh, okay. That's a generous amount of time.
So I'm sorry, through the chair, I have read all of Article 1 and I'm good with Article 1. I don't know about everybody else, but I am good with Article 1.
Anyone object to going to Article 2?
No objection.
Then let's move on.
Okay, so Article 2, and I apologize if I'm looking to the side screen because I have a larger screen over here that I can read it a little more easily. Currently, I believe the officers of the board are chair and vice chair. We could certainly provide for more officers if we thought we needed them, but with a 5-person board, 2 officers would seem adequate. The chair is the head of the board, has the powers of that office, and presides at the meetings. The question there is if you're going to allow remote participation, should the chair be allowed to be remote and still be serving as chair, or should we have a person who is physically present at the site of the meeting be running the meeting? I think that merits some discussion of the board, whether we resolve that today or not. If you think about running running the meeting via Zoom, when everyone's on Zoom, works pretty well. But if the public is physically present at the road commission and a quorum of the road commissioners is present at the road commission, is it practical for the person running the meeting to be on Zoom only?
Reasonable question that I certainly hadn't considered. Perhaps the vice chair could step in there if she has some thoughts. Barb?
It would seem to me, Margie, tell us if we can't do this, but if the chair cannot or prefers not to be physically present at the road commission, assuming that is the site of the meeting, can the position of the chair not be delegated at that particular meeting?
Right. I think the way I have drafted these, if the chair could not or chose not to be present physically and was participating by Zoom, but the vice chair was present physically, then the vice chair would run the meeting because he or she is at the site.
So if both of those individuals cannot attend physically, who's next?
We have not provided for that yet.
Is there anything to prohibit whoever is present to be identified by the board as the presiding officer?
It's a little out of the box, but we could consider that. There's nothing that would prohibit it.
Okay, then I'll ask forgiveness. Not permission. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that if we try to split every hair and consider every eventuality, we'll never get through these. So I think there's some degree, unless you tell us there is not, of flexibility to adapt to extenuating circumstances.
I think that needs to be put in here, right? Because if it is written as is, it needs to include either the vice chair and or given an emergency that they would be able to be. Am I incorrect in saying that if you have this physically present, then that is the way it's going to be, and it does not say and or vice chair, excluding any emergency?
The way I have it drafted is that if the chair is physically present, he or she runs the meeting. If he or she is not physically present and the vice chair is physically present, the vice chair runs the meeting. What I haven't provided for yet is if neither of them are physically present and the other three, the way we were envisioning this is that at least a quorum would be present. So in that example, the other three commissioners would be physically present. And so which of them would run the meeting? Would that person be appointed by the chair?
That would make sense. I only have, in this article through the chair on number 2, I have an issue with the word titular. I want that word removed.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
I don't
Because why?
care to tell you the truth, so.
Pardon?
So just delete.
I want that word deleted. Because titular, and I will give my reasonings, is holding that, it means that the position has no real authority, that the head has no real authority, and I'm not trying to diminish the authority and or do anything else. But to me, it says that that's only a figurehead.
I don't have any issues deleting that.
Okay. Anyway, to the actual question here, if the chair and the vice chair are not present, who then presides over the meeting? If I heard the suggestion by someone a moment ago saying that then the chair would appoint one of the 3 commissioners present physically at, let's call it, the road commission's offices, to chair the meeting. Does that satisfy anybody else in the conversation?
Mr. Chair, does the narrative for
Number 4, does that address that? The member shall perform such other duties as the board may prescribe. Does that implicitly include this possibility, this eventuality?
Well, except that somebody's going to have to choose, Jim. I agree.
Right.
It certainly considers that. You could do it by seniority, and that could get into a long discussion, or you could simply say that the chair would choose out of the 3 members that were present, physically present, the chair would appoint one of those 3 to be the acting chair for that meeting.
Why can't we simply say that the chair will appoint someone to act at that point?
That's, I think, what I just said, but you're exactly
Right.
correct.
I support that.
Okay. Gloria, do you have an opinion?
I support
for you?
what you just said.
I support that, Doug.
Okay, thank you, Joanne. Barb,
Sure,
does that work for you?
yes.
Okay. Let's move on to Article 3 then.
So Article 3 talks about meetings of the board. It talks about the first annual, call it organizational meeting held in January of each year. The previous year's chair calls the meeting to order and calls a roll call. If there's a quorum present, the board proceeds to elect one of the road commissioners to the position of chair. And the commissioner receiving the majority vote of the members is then the chair of the board for that following year.
For 2 years, please.
2 years?
2. The term of office should be 2 years.
Okay.
I think we have used it that way for the last, I don't know, since World War II anyway, and that's worked reasonably well. That's, again, my suggestion.
No objection.
The other suggestion I would make on Article 3 is rather than having it be the first meeting of the year, why not at the second meeting of the preceding month? In other words, the second meeting, or in the event, either the second or the meeting in December. But we normally have 2 meetings in December, just like every other month. That way there's approximately a 2-week lag in there, so that the paperwork can be done and what have you. And that way, when you sit down at the meeting of the 1st of January, everybody knows where they're going. Does that make sense? That's a suggestion also.
I support that change.
Support.
Support.
Rod?
I also support it.
Okay.
So it would be the second meeting in December where that change would be effective at the end of the meeting?
Yes, that would be correct. That would be a good way to handle it, I think.
I can't remember, do we typically have 2 December meetings?
We
Or
typically do,
could
Barb.
we say a meeting in December?
We have traditionally had 2 board meetings in December. It's
Okay.
uncommon to cancel the working session in December.
Okay,
That was a question I had because a lot of boards have trouble making things happen in late December.
Mhm.
Would there be a problem if we just said at one of the meetings in December and that it would be effective January 1?
I would be okay with that too.
Support.
I would argue a meeting in December. Your language, Cheryl, suggests that there will be 2.
And we
December.
typically have had to. I don't remember that we've ever missed one, but I take the point.
Anybody?
Are all
I
offices,
support.
Just a point of clarification, both the chair and vice chair serve 2-year terms.
Yes.
That's correct.
That's fine.
Anything else?
And
to
my,
Article 3?
I'm sorry. And
Article 3?
I'm sorry. My understanding would be that that election would take place in January I'm sorry, in December as opposed to January. Is that right or no?
That's correct.
Okay. That makes good sense.
I'm going to go a little off script here and ask legal counsel, are we allowed to prohibit firearms from being present at our board meetings?
I don't know the answer to that question offhand, but I will find out.
And if we can, I support that.
Uh,
I believe that's already prohibited. We don't allow them on premise.
I was going to say, we do not allow firearms on road commission property. Full
Okay.
stop.
Okay.
And that restriction certainly applies to the commissioners as well as to the employees. Commissioner Weigel notwithstanding.
He's not a problem anymore.
That's correct. I know where he's buried. I was there.
This is a joke, right?
Yes.
It wasn't a joke about Fred carrying firearms, no.
No, but
The previous commissioner, yeah, he's passed away, used to carry them all the time.
really?
Yeah.
Into the meeting?
I'm unaware that he carried them into the meetings. I don't believe that he did. He always had them in his car and usually an assortment. And our prohibition for firearms includes in your vehicle. We do not allow firearms on road commission property. Full stop.
Good to know. Ooh.
So anyway, moving right
Thank you
along.
for that.
Are we happy with Article 3 and the modifications we've made?
I think we've only addressed Article 3, Section 1 so far, Commissioner Fuller.
Okay. All right.
Margie, would you mind continuing? I think we're on to Section 2 with regular meetings.
There we
Yeah,
go.
that's
I'm sorry.
That's the following page. So we have the board will meet on a regular basis at times determined by the board. Meetings can be canceled in advance by consent of the board. Regular meetings on the first and third Tuesdays at 1 p.m. at the Road Commission meeting room. Could be held at other times and places as the board determines. And the notices of the meetings have to comply with the Open Meetings Act and any requirements of the bylaws.
So number 3, I just have a question, not that it necessarily wants to be there through the chair again. Is it, could it be in local operating practices? I don't know that necessarily needs to be in the bylaws that we also post meetings via social media, the ones that already, I know that we can help amplify the message, but the places that we already have social media, and I guess I'm asking Emily, what kind of burden that would be, but if you tweeted it and or put it on the Facebook page, also notice of our meetings to the public that we include in social medias that are already being managed by the administration.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to have that conversation separately when we talk about communications in general.
Okay.
About what channels we would use and how frequently we would be sending out messages. Certainly, I mean, happy to have the information available and encourage participation on any of the meetings. I just don't want to make a commitment, especially within the bylaws, that we're going to do something at a certain frequency. I really would defer to our communications manager on the strategies for communications so that they're as effective as possible. But certainly if that's a means that makes sense, we'd be happy to push that out.
I concur, Cheryl.
The Open Meetings Act requires notice in the lobby and notice on the road commission website. It does not speak to social media.
Okay.
Are we looking at number 4 yet?
I think we're about to.
Okay.
A lot of this in this section is dictated by the Open Meetings Act, the timelines, the notice requirements specifically. The 18-hour rule is straight out of the Open Meetings Act. So Commissioner Green, we were getting to section 4, the change in the schedule of regular meetings of the board has to be posted within 3 days after the meeting at which the change is made. There has to be a public notice stating the new date time. For a rescheduled regular or a special meeting, which would be an emergency session probably, you have to do another public notice at least 18 hours before the meeting. That's the 18-hour rule, on site and on the website.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have a question regarding?
No, I was going to ask that you elaborate on the 18-hour rule, which you did.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments on section 4?
Up from Doug.
No.
Okay.
So then if you need to call an emergency session, moving on to section 5, this is again straight out of the Open Meetings Act. You can call it in the event of a severe and imminent threat to the health, safety, or welfare of the public when 2/3 of the board decides that the delay in waiting till a regular meeting would be detrimental to the efforts to lessen or respond to the threat. That language is straight out of the Open Meetings Act. If you need to call the emergency session, you give notice pursuant to the 18-hour rule we just discussed, or paper copies of the public notice need to be made available to the public at the emergency session. And you need to identify the reasons why you can't comply with the 18-hour rule. And you can't just say there's an imminent threat to the health of the public or a danger to public welfare and safety. You have to be more specific and identify the specific reason why you can't meet the requirements of the 18-hour rule. Then anytime you call an emergency session within 48 hours after the session, you need to notify, if you conducted it without the 18 hours notice, you have to send official correspondence to the county commissioners informing them that you held the emergency session and why you did it within less than 18 hours notice. So obviously it's, in most cases, you're going to comply with the 18-hour rule.
So the intention there is if you can, just if we have, for example, another tornado in Dexter, because that's the last time I can remember us having a quote emergency. I think at the time we called it a special meeting, but if you can meet the 18-hour requirement, then there's no notification other than posting that meeting. Am I correct?
Right.
Okay. That was the way I was reading it. I just wanted to make sure. But if 2/3 of the board decided we had to meet in the next hour, then you would have to then notify, as you, according to this, you would have to notify after the fact. You would have to notify the Board of County Commissioners that you had had that meeting.
Correct.
Okay. I can live with that.
Margie, how is an emergency session different from a special meeting? We don't have a special meeting identified in these bylaws, I don't think.
Yeah, I think they're the same thing. So I think that's a good point, Commissioner Fuller, that we should either call emergency sessions special sessions or call special meetings emergency sessions. Is there a
my concern is, help me out here, Cheryl, Doug, and everyone else. It seems that on occasion we've had deadlines for authorizing settlements or other actions, and we've needed a special meeting to accommodate those unexpected deadlines. Those meetings would not fall under this definition of an emergency session. And I would ask how we then align with our bylaws in doing those things. No nefarious purpose, just because of a deadline that emerged, we needed to call a special, or the chair needed to call a special meeting. And we gave notice, and I think we were able to meet the
18-hour rule,
rule and all of those things.
I personally prefer that we call them special as opposed to emergency meetings. That's just my own preference. Emergency to me is somebody's laying in the driveway bleeding because they got shot with an illegal firearm. So that's, I concur with Barb.
I'd also like to concur with Barb. Is it possible to have a separate section that simply deals with a special session and still keep the emergency session clause? Counselor?
I'll have to look back at the Open Meetings Act on that. It allows for us to change our regular meetings, and it allows for sessions where we provide notice under the 18-hour rule, but those sessions have to be called in the event of a severe and imminent threat to health, safety, or welfare of the public.
Okay.
I suppose it could be an imminent threat to the welfare of the public if you really need to act quickly, and you would describe why that is. But I recall, again, I'll need to look at the specifics of the Open Meeting Act, but I think we may not be able to have a separate category of special meetings that we can call that don't comply with that requirement.
That requirement being the 18-hour rule?
Well, the 18-hour rule applies if you meet the requirement. You need to call an emergency session because there's a severe and imminent threat to health, safety, or welfare of the public. When 2/3 of the board decides that a delay would be detrimental to efforts to lessen or respond to the threat. So that's when you're allowed to meet on 18 hours notice. Otherwise, you're either rescheduling a regular meeting of the board or you're having a regular meeting of the board. I don't think there's a provision that you can otherwise meet on short notice.
But if we comply with the 18-hour rule, is it possible to have a special meeting of the board in compliance with the rule?
If the reason for the meeting is a threat, health, safety, or welfare of the public, when the meeting is necessary to respond to that threat or lessen.
So if we just wanted a third board meeting for whatever reason, and we published, I mean, we notify way in advance. I mean, question about meeting the 18-hour rule, we can't just have a meeting?
Well, you can change the schedule of the regular meetings of the board, which I would think.
That's why I say if we had a third meeting though, because if
yeah, but that's really, I mean, that is changing the schedule. That's saying we're going to have another meeting.
There has to be some way to do this.
I will look back at that, and I think I understand the board's direction, which is you want to be able to respond to those needs and comply with the Open Meetings Act, and meet on 3 days notice. Is that what you're typically doing? How much notice are you using the 18-hour rule?
It's been very infrequent, but as Commissioner Barb Fuller indicated, there have been a handful of instances where we have had to respond. It's primarily been with condemnation, but we've had to respond, and it's been out. The timing hasn't worked with our board meeting schedule to make that decision in a timely manner. So we have had to convene a special meeting to address that specific issue. And we have certainly given at least 18 hours notice, if not more, in advance of that. But it has been an instance where it's fallen out of our traditional board meeting schedule.
Okay.
I know there's verbiage for this. Special meetings have to specify in the call the business of that special meeting. You can't exceed what you've declared as the purpose for the special meeting.
Okay.
But it wasn't triggered by a threat or a disaster or anything I would characterize as an emergency as defined in Section 5. So I would welcome council's advice going forward on a special meeting provision or some other adaptation.
All right, that's good feedback. I appreciate those thoughts.
I concur with Barb. We have I can think of 2 instances where we have had a one topic agenda when we had to respond to a legal requirement for a specific purpose. And we had no problem meeting an 18-hour meeting notice. And we posted it and, went on about our business. We restricted it, as Barb just indicated, we restricted it to the agenda, the one agenda item that we had to deal with. And that was clearly posted.
Okay, thank you.
Further input on that particular item, commissioners?
Not for me.
No.
Not at this time.
No, not for me either.
We're good.
Okay, item 6 is just the ability to conduct working sessions like we're doing now.
Yep.
Item 7 is the meeting agenda, prepared under the direction of the managing director, emailed, mailed, or personally delivered to the road commissioners at least 72 hours before the meeting. And
I've got one comment at that point. We have, in the past, it has been our practice that the agenda for regular board meetings shall be prepared under the direction of the managing director and the acquiescence, or however you want to phrase it, of the chairman of the board.
okay.
I think it's important to make note of the line 3 in item 8, that persons participating in the meeting can hear and see each other. Microsoft Teams, you can't do that. So I think it's important to be aware that there are certain platforms for virtual meetings. Microsoft Teams, as far as I know, you can't see everybody. You can only see who's speaking and yourself. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's been my experience with Teams. So I think it's important to be aware that a commissioner can't post a picture of him or herself and call it good. You've got to be able to see them and hear them if they, in my opinion, are voting members of the body.
Concur.
Barb, I believe Teams has made some changes so you can see more video now. So it's become more like Zoom with like the most recent updates.
Okay, I just want to put that out there because it's, and participants, in my experience, even with Zoom, if you are a participant, you aren't necessarily visible. You can hear and you can speak if you're recognized, but you don't necessarily have everybody in view. Is that a host function? Or I just want to be clear. I have been in meetings where the voting members of that body put up a blank screen and never say a word. There's no way to know if they're even present in any way, shape, or form in the meeting. And
Commissioner,
I
that-
believe if you are a member of a board, you have an obligation to either be there or not be there, but not this fabrication of kind of being there without confirmation.
So I guess, just to confirm, you're requesting that it be very specific that the board member be visually seen?
Voting members be seen and heard.
Okay. Do you ever envision the time when someone would be calling into a meeting as opposed to, using some form of a video software, whether it's Zoom or Teams or whatever the future might hold for us?
I would object to someone only being present verbally. But I'm only one vote of 5 here.
Well, I want to concur, but I think that the only problem with that is that those often having difficulty for some reason with their internet, often if you're getting glitches, we ask in other meetings that we've been at that people shut off their video so that they stop glitching. It's just a data issue to expand their data width so that they can continue to participate and be heard and to be heard and to hear. This is a technical issue, takes up a lot of bandwidth. So as we're in meetings, if that starts to happen where you're freezing up when you're talking, I have suggested that people shut off their video so that they can continue to participate because it takes up less bandwidth. And that's just something to be considered. I think that if we put that in there when technically feasible or possible, that it's not the only time that you would have to turn it off is if you're having technical difficulties. And that's a lot of verbiage there, and I'd have to defer to, could that be put in there? And I absolutely get what you're saying, Barb, and I agree with that at some point you absolutely have to show yourself. But I do know that I've had people have to turn off and turn it back on, but they're present because they turn their video on and off to accommodate the technical difficulties that are happening for their internet service. And we could have Chris kind of verify that or not verify that, but coming from the technological background that I have, I know that's how we've been able to conduct other meetings on other boards that I sit on. So that's just something to consider.
I'd also like to join that recommendation with Gloria, because I actually had technical problems this morning where I thought I might have to call in, that I might not be able to access the internet. So I think to the extent that we can, allow people to be present, but not always be seen if there's a technical difficulty, I think that's important.
I think for me, the transparency, being transparent, being seen. I've been to meetings where boards were, and it wasn't a technical difficulty why they were not being seen. I don't know what their choice was, but they were voting, and they're at home, so I don't know who's voting. It could be their family member voting. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that could never happen. This board wouldn't do it, but I've questioned that. So I'm kind of in the middle about that.
Is there a way to have that actual visual presence be strongly encouraged but not mandatory, so that we can somehow address exactly what you were just describing, that as much transparency as possible is the preference of this board, but there may be, and we don't want to prohibit or somehow exclude someone if they indeed are running into that technical difficulty. I think we can handle the voting part of it a little bit separately, Joanne, because we talk about doing a roll call vote if you're participating virtually, so that we absolutely have a record of who's voting and how they're voting.
That sounds good.
If you recall our discussions earlier, you're on stronger legal footing as far as compliance with the Open Meetings Act if you can be seen and heard. So that's the preference under there as well. And I have a question. After the governor's orders have expired and these bylaws are what we're relying on to conduct the meeting, is it only the potentially up to 2 commissioners? Because remember, we want a quorum physically present. So we would have up to 2 commissioners participating by Zoom or some other remote communication. Are we foreseeing that there would also be public participation by Zoom? I was under the impression that the public participation was going to be physically present at the Road Commission as it has been in the past. So the only remote is going to be up to 2 commissioners.
Well, I think we need to differentiate between the remote participation from the commissioners and from the public. I think that they need to be separately addressed.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I would defer Margie to you if you're stating that you really think that we do have to have that ability to see, and should the person, lose that capability, then would they be absent at that point? And I'm talking about the commissioners, because we need to have a separate discussion here, I think, about the public. But for the commissioners, I guess, are you saying that they would no longer be even considered present or counted towards a quorum or as part of that meeting if we can't see them as well?
I think we're in a gray area then. I mean, I could make, since I'm not the one that is going to be physically present at these meetings or have the convenience of not being physically present, it's easy for me to say. But if you have a commissioner who has internet issues commonly, then maybe that person should be physically present and not participating via remote. But there is no black and, there's no clear line of separation there. The more you can see and hear, the better off you are. Can you allow for intermittent technical difficulties? Yes, you can probably do that.
Perhaps the U of M Board of bylaws could offer some examples on this, because I know one of their commissioners in the past, at least, has participated remotely for some time. It's trustee Kathy White was often not on site for these meetings because of professional responsibilities. So there may be some help there, a starting point at least for verbiage.
I know I posed a difficult question, and it's difficult to write these. General bylaws are black and white, so the exceptions to the rule, I don't even know how you would put them in there. But I agree with Barb. We need to be fully transparent when someone has a problem. And I believe you're correct. If somebody consistently has difficulties, technically they either be present or put themselves somewhere where they wouldn't have that issue. That issue be resolved. I'm talking about just an emergency situation. It can't be someone that has consistently has to be an exception to the rule, an occasional situation. So I know that that's difficult to write in. And so I do support what Barb and Joanne are saying. Absolutely, we need to be present. We need to be able to see who's voting, who's here.
Well, and I guess maybe we leave it as is, where it's a requirement for both visual and, audio, that they, to be considered present. And that's why we would require the in-person quorum. So the meeting and the decisions of the meeting can certainly continue and be done. If a person's having technical difficulties, maybe they're not a voting member at that point,
I would concur with that.
I would too. Oh, sorry. I've been at
So it's-
meetings where they did that, where they lost the person, and so that person wasn't able to vote. And then they came back, because of the technical difficulties, so.
So are we going to make any allowance for technical difficulties or no? I'm just wondering.
I think we concluded that it's difficult to do that. If you're late for a meeting or have some other issues, you can jump in at the point that you're at or get yourself somewhere where you can work out the technical difficulties. So I have found for myself, I have to have difficulties, and if I do, how to remedy them. I've used Chris, I've used some other things, but I get that your internet can go down, and I'm real familiar with that. But I also kind of have a plan, and this might be just being a parent all these years, where you have to have plan A, B, C, D all the way to Z, because sometimes they just all strike on off, of the things that can go wrong and how it is that you can continue to meet whatever the need is at that point.
Historically, if I can put something in here, we have been, I know since I've been the board chair, I am fine with people calling me up the morning of a meeting, the day before a meeting, 3 days before a meeting, 2 weeks before a meeting, and saying, I cannot be there on the 12th of February. Okay, fine. Then we'll get along with one fewer person. And it's the same thing for me. If you're having electronic difficulties, then you aren't going to be there. In the people's business, if we still have at least 3 commissioners there, the people's business is going to move on. I concur with Barb. If you cannot be seen and heard, then you probably shouldn't be involved in that meeting. And I'm fine with that. I have absolutely no issues. And if in the case that Rod described that, I couldn't get signed in this morning, fine. We will continue having the meeting. And if you get your connectivity issues solved 30 minutes later, then join the meeting when you can. I don't see the interest we should be all focused on is conducting the people's business, in my own mind. And 4 people can do that, 3 people can do that. We cannot do it with 2 people. So that's where I am.
That sounds good.
Are we ready to move on?
Well, if I may ask, so it's sounding like the language actually as is how we would like to leave it. So in order to be seen and heard, that's what's going to constitute for a commissioner to be present at a meeting.
I concur.
Okay. Question
You stated
with
that
respect
clearly.
to with the public, do we want to have the same requirements? Because currently we do allow people to dial in and participate in if they don't have the ability, an internet connection. So we do allow them to call in, and that's where we're like right now, the chair read in the beginning of our meeting, *9 and all of that to raise your hand. Do we want to allow virtual participation in our meetings? And then if we do, are we going to require there be a visual component for that? Or are we going to attempt to have public participation in the broadest sense possible?
Cheryl, can I add something to that? As to our current practice with Zoom has been to only share video, as you can see today, only share video for voting members and directors, our senior leadership staff and guests that are presenting. And the reason that we've chosen to do that is I'm sure you've all seen or heard stories of people taking over meetings or disrupting meetings and showing inappropriate content on their video. And so we've decided, our practice has been since April to turn off the videos of non-staff, non-commissioners, non-guests, official guests, just to add a level of security to prevent someone from taking advantage of a meeting that's open to the public like ours. So that's been the reason behind why we have it set up the way we have. There's certainly ways that if we want to see a resident, we could allow them to show their video and then just need to quickly turn it off if it goes awry. But that's been the thought process up to this point so far.
I don't think we should have the same conditions for public. I think they should be able to call in. You know, I'm just more concerned about the bylaws following the Open Meetings Act, and they don't require the public to, you know, have the same conditions as we do. So.
Correct. I concur with Joanne that the rules for the commissioners and voting board be different than those for the public. So public participation should be broader so that we allow as many people to participate that want to participate. We don't want to put limitations on the public.
No.
I concur with Joanne as well.
And I'll concur.
Margie, do you see anything on the face of that that would be problematic?
What was your question again, Cheryl?
I'm sorry, say that again, Joanne?
What was your question again? I'm sorry.
No, my question to Margie was, does she see anything on the face of that would be problematic if we had different expectations for our commissioners, which obviously is stricter with respect to both the visual and the audio, you know, participation versus the public, where we would basically have it as broad as possible, although we would be sheltering the visual for the reasons that Emily said.
Would
we
it,
have to put that in the bylaws about the public?
That's a good question.
not necessarily. And I wonder if, like, if somebody wants to make a presentation, this is, you know, a post-COVID world, hopefully we get there. If the public wants to make if a person from the public wants to make a presentation to the board, do they need to be physically present, or can they make, you know, comments to the board via Zoom? Are you going to have people, it's going to be interesting logistically if you allow that, because you'll have people physically present and you'll have people on Zoom.
Margie, when you say make a presentation, are you referencing like make public comment to the board?
Yeah, you're right. I'm using the wrong language for you guys to make public comment.
So my question, Marjorie, is number 8, participation in a meeting by video conference or similar equipment. Is that restricted? Is that language for public and members? And I think that's where we're talking about, do we need to add participation for board members and then participation for public is really what I don't really quite understand. Do we need to add something that's different so in these bylaws? Because if we keep it just like this, it reads to me that the public has got to adhere to what the board members have to adhere to.
We don't currently say
Am I incorrect?
anything about public participation. It says a member, a commissioner, may participate in a meeting by video conference.
Okay.
I think we need to amend that language because I've said that either the chair or vice chair is physically present, and we have determined that the chair could designate another member.
Okay.
To conduct the meeting, so I will make that change.
Okay. Thank you.
I can put something in my own personal belief so far is I agree with Joanne and others that spoke on the topic of public participation. I'm perfectly willing to have the public participate as they are now, so long as we have some, whether it's Zoom or something else. If we're using Zoom meetings, I have no problem allowing the public to comment. Public comment is should be, in my mind, welcome. That does not mean that if I want to make a presentation to the board about why the board needs to take some specific action on my property and I want the board to see the photographs, then I'm going to expect that the person, if we're having real live meetings, to make a presentation in person. If you want to make a comment, please call in, phone in, use a Zoom meeting if you can, but if you can't, then use the telephone and dial *9 and talk to the board under the circumstances that we presently are using, which stops short of a presentation about, you know, why you're flooding my fields or whatever it is that happens to be the issue in question. So I'm fine with leaving the public able to address us. I think they should be able to address us. Technology has moved along where I'm happy with their calling in, whether they're using Zoom or whether they're using their telephone. I have no objection to that whatsoever. But if they want to plead their case over why the sight lines on their driveway, our standard procedures aren't adequate to their circumstance, and they want to explain their circumstance, they need to do so in person if they want to show pictures and what have you. I think Emily's point has merit next week, next month, next year, just as it has had for the last 3 months. So that's my thought.
Are we moving in the direction that there will always be a virtual component to our meetings?
I think so, Barb.
So even if all of the commission, if we reach a post-COVID time, then we will still have the opportunity for public comment to be virtual.
That would be my thought. That, as you described earlier, I'm 1 vote out of 5. That would be my thought.
I would
I'm
hope
just
so as
having-
well.
I'm having flashbacks to meetings where the hall was packed with people physically present.
Yes.
In the event that there is now a visual or a virtual opportunity, there is no limit on the public comment component. I just put that out there as an expectation that we are inviting extensive public comment. Our rules do not, as far as I recall, limit public comment to 1 comment per individual. So I could speak 15 times for 3 minutes separately. Just thinking this through.
You raise a good point.
Well, we will get to that section, Barb, and we can discuss if we think the language is sufficient. It does talk about the chair having discretion if it's becoming repetitive. And forgive me, Margie, I don't remember the actual language, and I think it's further down in the actual bylaws. But we can certainly review that language as we get there to see if there's additional parameters that we want in place, at least to limit, you know, 1 comment per, 3 minute or whatever per person, or however you want to do it, or the first X number of people, or however, the board would prefer to handle public participation. But I do think that one thing we have found through this situation is that people are preferring to have a virtual component to a lot of meetings, not just our meetings. That it's convenient. It's a convenient way to participate. And I think this board has demonstrated its desire to be open on how it's making the decisions.
Bureau, does the chair have discretion to control the time period for public participation?
Again, I believe that's in there as we get a little further down.
I think we're already talking.
It's item 13.
Correct.
Okay.
Do we want to keep going in this order, or do we want to jump down to that point?
I'd rather keep it in the order that it's being presented.
Okay,
Agreed.
so are we comfortable then with 8? We're gonna, as we talked it all the way through, we're gonna leave the language that will require both the audio and the visual, and then we'll clarify that this is applying to the board itself as opposed to the public.
Yes.
That's fine.
Which Margie pointed out that item 8 says a member. So that essentially addresses your concern, I think, Cheryl.
Okay,
Yes.
Yes.
Item number 8 as written strikes me as being very clear. And that's
okay.
me.
And we'll clarify that it's also or the chair's designee if it ends up being that neither the chair nor the vice chair are present.
Agreed.
I'm okay with that. Should we move on to item 9?
Item 9 says we're going to conduct our meetings in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. And we'll conduct our business in open meetings except as those permitted to be closed under applicable law. We do say all persons shall be permitted to attend any open meeting of the board. I would probably leave that language as it is, but we could specify they can attend in person or remotely.
I would leave it. I would prefer that you left it that way. But
I agree.
Yeah, that's fine.
I concur.
We can have closed meeting in section 10 for the purposes allowed by law, personnel evaluation, collective bargaining, real property transactions, litigation, legal advice and counsel, review of application for public office, and to consider material exempt from discussion as per the Open Meetings Act. Nothing controversial there.
I'm wondering about the phrase review of application for a public office. I don't know what that is. What does that mean? Describe a situation where we'd be reviewing and whose application for, is this for elected office? What is that?
I think that's a fair point. I think the statutory things you can hold a closed meeting for include that, but I think that's a fair point that doesn't really apply to the road commissioners. So I can delete that. Okay.
works for me.
Order of business. I think that's consistent with what you do now.
No comments.
Please.
Then we're on to 12 and 13. The bylaws govern citizen participation during public meetings. Any person in attendance at a meeting shall be permitted to address the meeting subject to the following rules. 13 is where we really get into the ways that they can address the board. I don't think written communication is controversial. They can submit a written communication to the board, or they can appear at a regular meeting. And then we get into 13B, personal appearance. A person from the community who wishes to speak to the board will be afforded the opportunity to do so at a designated point in the regular agenda. They'll be requested to identify themselves, indicate the capacity in which they're speaking, whether they're representing a group or speaking on behalf of themselves. The chair retains the right to establish time limits to govern the length of the individual presentation. And in those instances where similar presentations of fact or opinion are made by many citizens, the chair retains the right to move the meeting forward to the next item of business when the chair is satisfied that the individual presentations are, I think I would change that to repetitive. I don't know, repetitious or
Well, repetitious is fine with me.
repetitious. Yeah, I'm sorry, I was misreading that. It's getting glare off my screen.
Or cumulative. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I think
I would like individuals who are requesting to speak to also be asked to identify their address of residence. I know they don't have to provide it, but I'd like to know, so where are you? Are you from Cleveland, Ohio? Are you from Saline? I mean, where is your residence?
So is public comment limited to residents?
No, that's not what I'm suggesting. And I don't think the OMA specifies. I don't think it specifies residents nor citizens either.
So what if someone refuses to give their address?
Then they refuse. They're asked to give it, they refuse, decline. I don't think we can require it. Can we, Margie? I mean,
No.
typically they're requested to provide that, but they are not required.
correct.
Okay.
As drafted, this gives a fair amount of discretion to the chair.
Mhm. Now, this speaks to personal appearance. Do we need a separate clause in there for video appearance or alternative appearance other than written and personal?
I think that's an issue for you guys to decide. We could add language in here that says that you can appear
Virtually.
virtually via
Okay.
answer. And I believe
Or remotely rather than virtually, if we're going to allow call-ins.
okay.
Okay.
And in the case of the public, we want to be able to hear them, but not necessarily don't have to see them.
My recommendation to the board would be to not see them. Just again, for what I spoke to earlier, I think that as a layer of protection to prevent against inappropriate material being shared. That doesn't mean they can't share say inappropriate things or offensive things, but that allowing them to show their video is asking for trouble, in my opinion.
I agree with Emily. I've been in meetings where unfortunately that has happened, and it's very distracting and disturbing.
I personally haven't, but I would agree with Joanne that it would be, and I concur with Emily's comments.
So we're providing for appearance virtually and remotely. Is that correct?
I would say not appearance, but
Presentation.
Personal participation.
Participation.
Or just public comment.
right.
I like that term as well, Barb. Members of the public can make public comments via whatever means they'd like to choose to call in, subject to the same rules and what have you as everybody else. But I have no objection to people being able to address us. I'm going to continue to use the term virtually just because it falls off my tongue. And Barb, I certainly recognize the problems that you're, suggesting could happen.
So can we change that word personal appearance to public comment? In line with what Doug is saying?
Or maybe say personal appearance for public comment.
Okay.
To distinguish it from written.
Although they're not really appearing if they're by phone, so I get that.
That's correct. That's,
Right, see, that's why I have to, when you put that word appearance in there, that,
Mhm.
then you have to define it.
Personal participation for public comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
What did you end up saying, Margie?
The 13B would be called, and I'll make these changes, Cheryl, and send them back to you to confirm, but 13B would be personal participation for public comment. Are we ready to move on?
I am.
Yes, I am.
So 14 is just about members of road commission staff. I think they're going to be physically present, correct?
If we're having public meetings, I would think so.
Physically or virtually. Right.
Right.
Well, 14 now says that presentations by members of the road commission staff are governed by the same procedure for members of the community, except the staff making reports requested by the managing director or the board may be given the opportunity to speak as part of the managing director's report. So I would think in 90+% of those instances, that person is going to be physically present in the road commission meeting room. But that would not prohibit that staff person from participating remotely.
Fine.
Then written material, it just is guidance on where that would be submitted. No person to be excluded from a meeting except for breach of the peace at that meeting. We follow Robert's Rules of Order. Is that current practice?
I would not like to see that in there personally. We have never adopted Robert's Rules of Orders, and that would lead to a long and involved discussion.
I think that if you don't use Robert Rules of Order, it'll be difficult to maintain order of a meeting. I know that we loosely sometimes follow Robert's Rules of Order.
Yes.
We can choose to later, the bylaws can say how we can suspend regular meeting orders, but I think that it needs to be in there. I don't know, that's my position.
Yeah.
I kind of concur with Gloria as well. I think it's good as a guide that people know that we're governed by a set of rules. And they know what those rules are. Even if there's some deviation from it, slightly.
Well, and it says that it's modified by the bylaws of the board.
Right.
So then on that same topic, on the next page, we get into a fair amount of detail, not so much the voting provision, but like 19, 20, 21 are all kind of portions of Robert's Rules of Order. We wouldn't necessarily have to get into that kind of detail in the bylaws, but we can. So I'm looking for some feedback from the board on that.
Can we go back to if everybody is okay with 17 as it's presented? Barb, I haven't heard you say anything. Are you okay with 17?
I'm comfortable with 17. I don't think it's restrictive.
Okay.
It has the potential to be, but as we have conducted our business, I don't see that it would be.
All right.
I'm good with
Move on
17.
to 18 then.
I just want to point out the definition of breach of the peace.
Where do you see breach of peace?
That's back up on excluding a member from the meeting in 16.
Yes, yes. Creating a public disturbance, usually involving unnecessary or distracting noise. Merely insulting another or causing annoyance is not a breach of the peace.
Okay.
I have a question through the chair. I don't know, since I'm still new here, do we have Sergeant of Arms or no at our meetings? And
Say that
how
again.
is that taken care of? Is there a Sergeant of Arms who enforces our rules? And how's that taken care of? And because it goes to kind of what Barb is talking about.
We've, in the 10 years I've been here, or 11 years, whatever it's been, no such issue has ever arisen.
Okay,
So the answer would be no. Specifically, we do not have a sergeant at arms.
okay.
We have a sheriff's department next door. I mean, literally.
Right. Well, right. I just, so, and to the disturbance, or to what Barb is speaking about, where is that again? Exclude, so what's
16.
your question, Barb? What your concern? Should it be more than that or not more than that?
If
Breach of-
someone is being obnoxious and belligerent, I think it falls to the chair to control the meeting in that respect. But when we use those words, breach of the peace, if I'm remembering that right, it's really limiting. That language is very limiting, unless there's a legal definition that Margie can give us that's different than the one that I pulled up by Googling it.
There is no set legal definition of that term. I mean,
So where did that come from? Why to be included in this document?
that was in the draft that was considered about 10 years ago. And I did not change it.
Barb, this was that draft from a decade ago was modeled after the Board of Commissioners bylaw.
Okay. Does that prohibit the chair from cutting someone off, for lack of a more eloquent phrase, if they're being abusive and obnoxious?
Their opportunity to be abusive and obnoxious would be during public comment. So we would go back up to 13B.
I mean, I'm hopeful we never have to deal with it, but once you adopt a document like this, people will use it. People will use it.
Marjorie, I've kind of done the same thing that you did. I think that it leaves for room for Doug to still, or whoever the chair is, to call to order. And I think it previously meant, I don't know if the state of Michigan, if we have any laws that speak specifically to that, but it usually is disorderly conduct. But I don't think that it limits him. Am I incorrect? I think that's the thing. Does it limit the chair for a specific definition? If it doesn't, then this is okay. But if it does, then we need to look at that. Would it limit what we or someone else would consider? I know that it may seem subjective, but somebody who is loud and disorderly, does breach of the peace limit what we can do, or what the chair can do, or someone else?
I think it's intended to limit the exclusion of a member of the public from the meeting for, maybe saying things that the commissioners might deem rude, or, where is the line? Could you speak to disorderly conduct instead? Yes, that would allow you to exclude you know, to exclude more objectionable conduct than breach of the peace, which is, as I think Commissioner Barpfuller noted, you know, kind of on the outer edge of behavior.
I'm more comfortable with disorderly conduct. I don't want a heavy-handed chair to be able to censor comment from the floor, but I also want the chair to be able to maintain order and establish some boundaries on behavior at a meeting.
When I read breach of
So
the peace,
maybe-
that term is disorderly conduct. But I mean, you could change the terminology, but it's still going to be a subjective call by the chair.
As long as the chair is allowed. Yeah, okay. Sorry to have dragged us down that rabbit hole.
I'll
Okay.
modify that language and then you guys can consider it.
And I'd just like to clarify, this would also apply if we're talking about remote participation as well as physical participation. So essentially, the chair is the one who is ultimately making this decision that the person is out of order and would be excluded from the meeting. Is that a correct statement?
Do you want to say, I think if we say as determined by the chair, maybe that gives the chair too much unilateral authority? If the rest of the board disagreed?
The board could object.
And if we're talking virtual removing, there's two options. If someone was being disorderly in public comment, then we could, a decision could be made to mute that person and leave them in the meeting so they could still listen. The other option would be I can remove someone, from the meeting itself, and we've done that ahead of a closed session. We could virtually remove them from the meeting, but there are two levels of that from a virtual meeting standpoint.
Well, you know, if somebody is on the phone or is remote to pretend that we're having a real meeting, as it were, where the board was physically in the same place. If we have somebody on whatever kind of device who starts being abusive, I want Emily to have the ability to mute that person instantly. And I don't know if that's something that needs to be written into our bylaws or not. I don't personally think that it does.
No, I think the way that it's written, as long as it doesn't say the chair has to do it, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Marjorie has put it in there in that way already, that she can do that, because it doesn't say specifically only the chair. Am I right?
Yeah, I think I think it's easier with remote participation, as Emily was pointing out, because you don't have to exclude the person from the meeting, you just mute them. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
If they're being, disorderly. So then 16 wouldn't even come into play because you've not excluded them. What 16 is really talking about is kicking somebody out of a meeting.
Right.
So I'm good with this, so.
I am too.
But Mr. Chair, we've now spent 90 minutes on these bylaws and we've got other
4 more
agenda
pages.
items. I'm wondering about picking up where at this point at a future working session,
I think
unless
it's
the other
a good time.
items are not critical to address today.
And Cheryl, you tell me, do we have the Parks Commission, I think is next on the agenda.
Correct. We have people from Parks Commission who are prepared to present today, so I would hate to have wasted their time.
So,
They've now been in the
Today.
waiting room for an hour and a half. Who knows what they're actually doing on their end, right? As they're
I
waiting.
wish you hadn't said that, but anyway.
Well, yeah,
I think
they were told they are second on the agenda, but I would not want to be rude either, so.
so
Right.
should we pick this conversation up at the next working session starting with item number 19, motions put.
I support that.
Thank you.
Support.
Support.
I concur.
There we go.
Okay.
Marjorie, can you accommodate yourself to our next working schedule or our next working session?
I'm sure I can. I have no vacation plans, so.
Sorry to hear that,
Unfortunately,
Margie.
right?
Fortunately, huh?
But
Yeah,
with
and I
remote
will-
participation, you're always available, right? That's
I know.
the curse of the
I-
whole thing.
I will do a little homework on the issues that we discussed today. And I will revise the sections where we discussed revisions so that we can quickly consider those also at the next working session.
Yeah, and if anybody has any questions or comments in the interim, please let me know. If it's something that then we need to look further into, then at least we're prepared for that discussion. And certainly, I mean, it would be fully vetted by the board before any changes would be made, but at least then we're prepared for that conversation at the next working session,
Absolutely.
When is the next working session?
the 18th of August
At 9 a.m.?
at 9 a.m. Yes.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Margie.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Margie.
We want to see if we have any parks people that want to talk to us still.
It appears that we have at least two people from the Parks Commission who are with us today. We have both Chloe Vaughn, who is the director, and Peter Sanderson as well. They had originally asked to come and share sort of an overview, first of all, of the Border to Border Trail project, which has been an ongoing endeavor with county parks for, what is it, the better part of 20 years, Coy, that you've been working on this project. And so certainly having some newer commissioners with us, we thought that that would be useful information. It's something that we have worked together with county parks on for quite some time. So it's something that I think is absolutely helpful. And then specifically, we'd like to talk about at least one portion of the trail that connects between Chelsea and Dexter. Again, we've had various components of that we've talked about over the years, but County Parks has a certain segment that they've been looking on. They've got some property that they have acquired along there, and there's some work that they'd like to do in the near future. So with that, Coy, if I could hand it over to you.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
First of all, I want to apologize in advance. My internet has been spotty and I've already been dropped from the call once today while just listening. So, and it's funny, you talked about the video being a drag on the bandwidth. That was a good part of your discussion earlier. So once we start with the slideshow, I'll probably drop my video if it's okay with everybody. First of all, I want to welcome the two new road commissioners. Look forward to working with you. We already off to a good start with Ms. McCullum. She joined us for our first Parks Commission meeting last week. And while I'm at it, I also want to thank Barb Fuller for her many years of outstanding service to the Parks Commission. So with me today, I have Peter Sanderson. He's the lead on the Border to Border Trail project, along with Roy Townsend from our office, obviously the former director of the Road Commission. And Roy is, I believe, here to answer any questions that come up, but Pete and I will handle most of the actual presentation. So with that, do we have the PowerPoint presentation queued up?
Yep, Coy, I'll go ahead and pull that up.
So considering we have, as we mentioned, a couple new road commissioners, I want to start with kind of a big picture overview, and then I'll hand it over to Pete to do the more detailed presentation.
So can you see this? I just wanted to ask that real quick.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Great.
And that wonderful image is one of the new bridges that we just put in just east of Dexter on the trail headed from Dexter to Ann Arbor along Huron River Drive. It's in Dexter Huron Metro Park. Next slide.
Did that work?
Yep. Thanks,
Great.
Pete. Okay, I'm going to drop my video here and hopefully I can stay on. If you lose me, Pete can take the presentation and run with it.
Sure thing.
So the Border Trail, most of you know that we consider that kind of the spine of the non-motorized trail network through Washtenaw County. We are blessed with an outstanding network of parks along the Huron River through Ypsilanti, Ann Arbor, and when you get up in the Dexter area, there are Hudson Mills Metro Parks, and of course, Washtenaw County Parks, we have a couple preserves. But going back to the 70s, the idea that people started talking about was connecting all these, not only the communities, but the park resources with a trail system. So the goal is to connect the people, parks, and destinations and make a trail that is for all ability levels. It's a 10-foot wide paved trail, some boardwalk where we need it. It's an ADA compliant, accessible trail system is the vision. And while Washtenaw County Parks is the lead agency, this is built completely on partnerships. In fact, you know, some of the trail segments, especially through Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor, predate us even calling it the Border Trail, and are the trail systems through the park systems in those communities. So the agencies involved in this, of course, Washtenaw County Road Commission is a big partner. MDOT and the MDNR, Huron-Clinton Metro Parks, the cities of Ann Arbor, Chelsea, Dexter, and Ypsilanti, townships of Ann Arbor, Linden, Lima, Scioto, Sylvan, and Ypsilanti. And nonprofit organizations, we are very fortunate to have a lot of private interest in the trail, especially in the last 5 years. The Huron-Waterloo Pathways Initiative formed in the Chelsea area and now covers the entire county and helps organize the private energy behind this trail initiative. St. Joseph Mercy Health Systems, Eastern Michigan University, Washtenaw Community College, and the Huron River Watershed Council are some of our other nonprofit partners on this system. Next slide. So another thing that happened that really elevated the profile of the Border Trail in recent years is Governor Snyder identified what they call the Iron Bell Trail, working with the Michigan DNR. They identified some routes of the trail that stretch from Belle Isle up to Ironwood in the UP, and there's actually 2 routes. The blue route there identified the Border Trail as an important link in the Iron Bell. So that opened up additional funding for us and other partners to bring it into to really elevate the profile of the Border Trail. So we have, within the county, we have approximately 55 miles of trail included in the Border Trail, and nearly 35 are either complete or under construction. And while we call this the spine of the non-motorized, it's not the only trail system. We're also working with other communities to provide links to the Border Trail and other projects around the county that provide locally important trail projects. So the regional connections of the Iron Bell Trail provides a link through Chelsea up to Stockbridge, and then the Iron Bell Trail continues on to Jackson. We're also connecting up north of Washtenaw County up through Hell and Pinckney area, where we're going to connect to the Lakelands Trail, an existing trail in Livingston County that will allow us to create a loop, a 44-mile loop off of the Border Trail and make it more of a regional destination trail. And then once we get to the southeast portion of the county, near Ypsilanti Township, we connect to Wayne County, where there's about a 5-mile gap, and then it connects into the Detroit system that connects all the way to Lake Erie. So once we fill that gap in Wayne County, we'll have a regional trail system that takes you from Lake Erie all the way through Washtenaw County and ties into the Lakeland Trail. Next slide. So really this is built on a long history of Washtenaw County Parks and the Road Commission collaborating on these projects. As most of you will agree, I think Washtenaw County is fortunate to have the best road commission in the state. And this becomes particularly evident to us as we talk to other parks agencies who are trying to build trails, and they talk about their relationship with the road commission. Not only are they not cooperating on trail projects, but they are often seen as a hurdle, as someone that they have to get by to actually build the trail project. So we are very grateful and fortunate to have a road commission that is innovative and forward thinking, that supports all modes of transportation, and has really been a key player in the border-to-border trail. It started with some of our first segments of the border-to-border trail in 2001, the segment around St. Joe's Hospital in the Ypsilanti area. We've also, the Parks Commission has been involved in some road commission projects whenever there was a need to expand a shoulder or provide a bike lane. We were participant in the Huron River Drive expansion a few years ago. The Road Commission was a lead agency in the Hudson Mills Metro Park in 2007 through 2009, a segment of the B2B. And it's the most heavily used segment. We put some counters out there, and we have 250,000 plus annual passes on these sensors. So the border trail is heavily used, and it's getting more use as we fill out the gaps, not only as a recreational trail, but also for commuters in our urban areas. And since the road millage was established in 2016, we've been involved in many more projects. Again, not only the border trail, but in all communities across the county. Next slide. So a unique thing that we are extremely proud of is our ability to leverage this millage money. And I think we might have an important vote today on a millage renewal that we're all looking forward to seeing that pass. But since 2016, our goal has been to leverage the millage money 2 to 1 with an additional $1 of private money and also of grant money coming in from federal and state grant sources. And since 2016, we've not only met that goal, but we've exceeded it. So we've brought in a little over $5 million in millage funding, and we're able to build over $19 million in trail projects throughout the county. Through the private money, we brought in $4.4 million from the Huron-Waterloo's Pathways Initiative, so that's our private money, and then nearly $10 million in state and federal grants. So with that, we have 11 miles of new trail construction that's been completed in the last 4 years. So this, if you ask, is this road millage having an impact? It absolutely is, and we're delivering a lot of new trail projects across the county. And with that, I think I'll hand it over to Pete, and he will fill you in on the details on some of the priorities, current projects we have going, and some of the future projects that we're targeting.
Great. Thank you, Coy. Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. So what's happening on your screen here are those projects that Coy just referenced. This is what was completed or has been initiated since 2016. Some of it is under construction right now, but you can see that we have been able to leverage those funds that Coy referenced all across the county through some state and federal opportunities, as well as with the private funding side of the millage dollars locally. I won't spend too much time going through these. If you have specific questions, please let me know. I believe a lot of folks have seen a lot of these projects. The Road Commission has been involved in at least half of what you see up on the screen. As we move forwards, here's what we are planning on doing. These are in no particular order, but it's kind of trying to identify how we are planning to improve the trail system and close the gaps, because as Coy mentioned, our goal is connectivity between cities and parks and destinations. So by having a system that links Chelsea, Dexter, Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, and then makes those regional connections, we're connecting more than 2/3 of our county's population within a pretty close distance of the trail system. So one of the key gaps that we'd like to talk about is the area between Chelsea and Dexter. So I guess before I dive into that, are there any questions on kind of the overall county build?
I'd like to
No?
listen to it in the order you want to present it.
Okay, that sounds good. So the first phase of Chelsea-Dexter corridor is right there. And that was finished last summer. And that was kind of a project of opportunity. There, MDOT Rail was involved in the project because they were trying to close some driveways as part of the high-speed rail corridor project. So that got involved with the Road Commission, and Parks was simultaneously trying to build the trail. So we ended up all collaborating, and we have some shared driveways that are adjacent to the trail project there. Here's kind of a map of where that is. It starts at Freer Road and parallels Dexter-Chelsea Road on the south side of the railroad tracks, almost all the way to Lima Center. And so one of the reasons that I wanted to bring this up is we as in County Parks, has been planning the Chelsea to Dexter corridor through typical public engagement processes and lots of research in how to best connect those cities. But this one kind of popped up because the railroad wanted to proceed quickly with the driveway closures. So we accelerated the project schedule a little bit and constructed this project. Now that kind of project approach, taking the opportunities where they present themselves, has been a successful model in other communities in our county. Namely, Pittsfield Township and Ypsilanti Township have both been very successful by capitalizing on opportunities to construct segments of the non-motorized trail system, eventually leading to large amounts of connectivity. In Ypsilanti Township, the example being the loop around Ford Lake. That took a long time to get done, but it's mostly complete. I think there's maybe one little sidewalk gap in front of a couple businesses right now. And then in Pittsfield Township, their projects were the Lore Textile Platte Road Greenway system. And I believe the Road Commission was involved in a lot of those projects as well. But again, just working on projects where they present themselves to eventually create that holistic system. And so one of the things that we're working on next, kind of the next 3 to 5 years, we would like to try and complete the Chelsea to Dexter corridor. Is we're working with the city of Chelsea right now to connect what we've done on the northwest side of the city to what is going on east of the city. So that's in the works right now. And also Watts is working on that with their Chelsea Pop program. And then these are in no particular order, by the way. And then we have a couple of different gaps that might be constructed in 3 to 5 phases, depending on how it works. But the last one here being the connection in with the city of Dexter. So we've been coordinating with them on their end to try and understand ways to potentially tie into the Mill Creek Park trail system. That was constructed, well, it's being constructed in 2 phases. The first phase comes south out of Hudson Mills Metro Park, and that's our very popular trail segment that Coy mentioned, getting more than 250,000 annual passes in front of those sensors. And phase 2 right now is under construction, and that project ends on Baker Road and kind of goes near the school property. So we're coordinating that end to see what could potentially be done to connect the trail from, say, Parker Road into the city of Dexter. That's an ongoing project, but as we move a little bit west of there, there's another potential opportunity segment that we have identified. So what you're looking at on your screen, I don't know if can you see my cursor?
Yep.
Yeah.
On
Okay.
Dancer Road.
Yep, so this is Dancer Road right here. You have Dexter Chelsea across the bottom, and then you have Wiley all the way on the right-hand side of your screen. And so this parcel that is in red went on the market last year, and our nonprofit private group that we're working with, the Huron Waterloo Pathways Initiative, purchased it when it went on the market. So it's approximately 80 acres, provides basically a half mile of road frontage. And they purchased it with the intent of helping to move the trail system along and to potentially provide as much road separation as possible to maximize user experience, minimize disruption to the road, and allow us to select an ideal trail alignment that minimizes the environmental impacts of that. So we've been looking, and what you see in yellow is a very conceptual layout, but the idea is to pull it into the property, avoid trees, avoid wetland impacts, and eventually construct that section of trail. However, looking at that in as a standalone project, it doesn't really go anywhere. So as we started expanding this out and thinking about it, what the county parks would like to do is work through a process similar to what we've done on other projects with road commission staff, where the county parks would take the lead on public engagement or any survey and design work that might occur, and try and build this out to be a little bit broader of a segment using road commission right-of-way that I've highlighted on the screen in red, coming out all the way to Wiley Road. So what that might look like is what is drawn in yellow. And so we're in the early planning phases of this. Ultimately, this would result in almost a 1.6 mile segment. 0.7 miles would be on the Huron Waterloo Pathways Initiative property, and nearly 0.9 miles would be in the Road Commission right-of-way. And this would allow cyclists going from or between Dexter and Chelsea to have a significant off-road portion of trail to use, and it would give the opportunity to bypass the double curve on Dexter Chelsea roads. So what we really wanted to do was just open this up for questions and bring you up to speed on the purchase of the land by the Huron Waterloo Pathways Initiative and see if there are any questions from road commissioners.
Yeah, Pete, if I may add to what you were just describing, in preliminary discussions with County Parks staff, what they would be looking at is, like he described, developing an alignment that made sense. Ultimately, they would be developing plans and requesting to build under permit from the road commission. So that would be the involvement or the set of permissions that the county parks would be going through should they move forward with this project as they're going through the design. Ultimately, they would be seeking a permit from us.
I have a question. The property that's being, you already purchased the property, right? That the,
Yes, that was purchased by a
1940.
separate group.
So, the trail that's going through there, I see that it looks like this was probably farmland or something.
Yes.
So, is there going to be any, I can see where there's natural area, but then where there's farm area, is there gonna be anything done for that? Or is this gonna leave it like it is?
That is still to be determined. Right now, and again, this is the parcel is not owned by the county parks, so we don't have authority over what they do with their land. But I do believe that they have expressed interest in doing plantings along the trail to at least enhance it in the long term. I don't know what their plans are for the remainder of the property.
Will the, you said you were gonna have some sort of community input. Will they have input, be able to have input on that? Will the people that own it allow that?
I don't know. I mean, again, it's owned by a nonprofit organization, and I think if they were going to develop it in any way that's outside of the trail use, or if it's going to become more like a park, I would assume that they would have to go through whatever process Lima Township has established for building or zoning compliance.
Okay, thank you.
So Pete, where does the existing trail, does that go all the way to Dancer?
It does not. No, there would still be a gap between Dancer Road and Lima Center. And so that's one of those areas that we're still researching, just like we're researching from Wiley Road all the way into the city of Dexter. We're exploring different alignments. But with the purchase of this property, just because it came on the market and HWPI capitalized on that, this seemed like a potential short-term project that could be constructed if it's feasible.
Yeah, as Pete was describing and were describing earlier, one of the successes of the border-to-border trail has been the ability to be opportunistic and to construct segments as they made sense or as opportunities presented themselves. For those commissioners who've been with us for a while, I think we know that there is some concern along Dexter Chelsea Road, but this would not be in an area where we've heard those concerns to date, and this allows them additional opportunity to find alignments for some of those areas that might be more problematic. But this would be an area where they could continue at least the overall goal of getting from Chelsea to Dexter, knowing that it's being built segment by segment and not necessarily consecutively.
And just
Right,
to add to that, I'm sorry. In fact, some of the concern that we got from the residents in this area is that we were going to propose to put it on the south side. As you can see, there's a lot more smaller lots and houses that sit right up on Dexter Chelsea on the south side. So by acquiring this parcel, HWPI gave us the ability to put it on the north side of Dexter Chelsea Road and keep a lot of the neighbors in that area happy.
Yes, thank you, Corey. That was what I was about to say as well.
We've got a
So we are
question.
trying to respond to the public comment as much as we can.
Peter, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
The recent, hasn't been a change in ownership because it's in front of the bankruptcy courts, but the property that for purposes of this conversation we'll call Chelsea Grain Company. Is there any possibility of getting the trail onto the north side of Dexter Chelsea, where the trail currently ends, and going on the north side over from, in other words, basically from Lima Center over to Dancer for that mile? Then
that is something
go ahead.
Yes, that is something that we're exploring right now. Again, a lot of the residents have expressed their preference for the trail to be on the north side of the road. The reason it's on the south side of the road as it comes into Chelsea was because that's where the county-owned property existed, and also it prevents us from having to cross over the railroad tracks, which is a benefit. So from that point, to answer your question, we are definitely looking at options to go north, or to go on the north side of the road out to Dancer. And that's something that we'd like to, continue to explore. And, I guess kind of throughout this corridor, one of the big things that we would like to do is probably, start to talk to some of those property owners on an individual basis. And I mean, from, Lima Center all the way to the city of Dexter, we'd want to talk to people as we do more research and as we identify where the trail could or could not go based on either permit requirements or environmental restrictions or utilities, anything that could be out there. So yes, that is something that we'd like to look at, but right now, I think we wanted to. We just saw this as an opportunity from Dancer to Wiley and wanted to bring this to your commission's attention as a potential opportunity.
Mr. Chair,
Please.
there is history with the board and the commission with regard to this right-of-way. I recall in the late 90s and early 2000s, variety of conversations along the lines of transportation network planning and the use of this right-of-way to soften the curvature of Dexter Chelsea Road, overcome potential safety issues with motorists trying to navigate that sharper reverse turn on the right side of this map image. So there has been a long-standing interest in eventually developing an alternative alignment for Dexter Chelsea Road along that right-of-way. And you can see that would be a much softer alignment for a major road like that. And we certainly have several instances of permitting pathway within the county road right-of-way. So alignments could feasibly coexist. But I just wanted to bring that to the board's attention. There is a history, there has been an interest to utilize this for a public road alignment. And any other uses for public utility providers or a pathway, it'd probably be useful to coordinate those alignments so it wouldn't interfere with that future possibility.
Right, and that was discussed already with county parks staff. It is understood, that's part of why it would be there under permit, so that we could coordinate those uses. And certainly county parks understands while we wouldn't necessarily want to see it removed or have to be relocated, that possibility does exist should that time come when we move forward with the realignment of Dexter Chelsea Road.
Is the realignment you're talking about the stretch that goes from the easternmost border of this HWPI property to Wiley Road?
Yes.
So Barb,
So
yeah,
you're-
it's about where my
Cursor is?
here, and then it would go out all the way to Wiley over here.
Right, I'm talking about the road realignment.
It's
Yes.
basically the same alignment.
Huh. Does the road commission own a right-of-way that follows that yellow line? West to east?
Pete, if you
Yes,
can help
Barb.
me with your cursor here, we've got from basically not quite that, right, yep, right there. Keep going east, 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 stop. So we've got a portion of that. We've got to just west of where you're at.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I lost my cursor. There it is.
Yep. So a portion of that is the Bolin, and then the remainder of that is road commission. So there would still be some additional acquisition necessary for us to move forward with this alignment. But when the development there that says Beacon Hill Drive went in, we did preserve our rights and acquire the right of way that was necessary for that realignment.
Thank you.
And it's not uncommon for us to issue a permit to occupy those right of ways or areas where we have secured future easement for right of way. And we just make sure the terms and conditions of the permit are very much stating that if the road were to be realigned, that the pathway would have to be reconstructed at the cost of the applicant. So that has been done in the past, and certainly preserving our rights for the future if that road alignment were ever to occur. And right now we don't have any plans. We don't have anything identified long-term or in the short term for funding such a realignment.
Who is the applicant then? Who would be the applicant? That it would be responsible for paying for the change?
Right now,
be
my
Washington
understanding is county parks.
County Parks. And also county parks would be responsible for any maintenance on the pathway.
And that is typical practice for any pathway being constructed in the road right of way. The applicant is either county parks or the township, generally speaking. Sometimes we deal with the city as well. They are responsible for the operation and maintenance, and every permit we issue is revocable if we have needs, public needs for that. I think all of our applicants understand that, and most certainly through our partnership over the demonstrated long term with county parks, they certainly understand that.
Any other questions for county parks? All right. Well, thank you for coming and sharing that information today. We appreciate it. And we certainly look forward to continuing to work with county parks on the different projects that they have had over the years. And Coy, you made me feel old when you started referencing the part around St. Joe's as being one of the first segments constructed. I remember working with Peter Basil and building segment J of that path along there. So thanks for that.
Yep, sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it's obviously been a long-standing relationship, and one that I think that both organizations can take a lot of pride in helping provide to our community.
Thanks for having us. And if you have any questions, Pete, Roy, and I are always available for contact.
Coy or Peter, I don't care. When are you going to start construction on the piece east of Zeeb Road along Huron River Drive?
We are still waiting on some final permits on that one, but we'd hope to. Yeah, well, we hope that can be under construction in 21. And we actually ended up splitting the project, and there's a portion that's entirely contained within Delhi Metro Park that our Parks Commission just authorized the construction contract on that. It's about 4/5 of a mile, and that should be starting shortly after Labor Day this year.
Just for the other board members' reference, the project that we are working cooperatively with County Parks on is from Zeeb Road to essentially Delhi Court, which gets you into the Metro Park. It will include a path along Huron River Drive, and then ultimately a bridge over the river adjacent to the existing railroad bridge, getting us into the Metro Park, and that will be the ending point for that segment. And that segment has got TAP funds, Transportation Alternative Program, so those are federal funds. So we have an agreement between County Parks and the Road Commission for us to administer it, because the federal funds have to come to an Act 51 agency. And then we're nearing final plans. So we do have some right-of-way to acquire as well. So Kurt Roche from our office will be working with a resident to acquire that. You may see an action item for that, but also you'll see final plans, and then ultimately a resolution that the board will pass that will submit everything to MDOT, and then finally we'll get an MDOT contract that the board will also need to approve as well. So, but we anticipate construction to really occur in 2021.
And one more question for the Parks guys. Any further motion on the reuse of the Bell Road Bridge?
Well, that's one area that we should definitely continue our conversations in. We've been looking for a spot for it, and obviously that's one of the challenges. Is it's a great bridge. We worked with the Road Commission to disassemble that and evaluate it structurally. It appears that it could be rehabilitated for slightly less than a new bridge, but the problem is finding a location where a 104-foot long bridge can be applied, where our modern standards are showing that we need 180 to 200 feet for most Huron River applications. So it hasn't been, this is nothing official, but we're still trying to see if that this would be a possibility to use in the city of Dexter, perhaps, to cross Mill Creek, because that's only about an 80-foot long channel itself. We'd have to probably use tail spans because that area of Mill Creek has a wide floodplain. But that's something that we have proposed to the city kind of informally. And the bridge actually has some history from Judge Dexter. So I think it would be an appropriate use to put it into the city of Dexter if that's a possibility. But we're still waiting on the official word.
Thank you.
Any other questions for?
Well, thank you for having us.
Yep. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Are you ready for our last item?
Sure.
All right, so the last item that we have is just a brief overview of our current procurement policy. Over the last month or so, we've received several questions from different commissioners with respect to the payment of different things and how we were handling that. So I thought it would be helpful for staff to give just a brief overview of how we do that, so that if you have any questions, of course, always please give us a call. But I thought that this would just be helpful to understand sort of the process that we go through at the staff level with respect to any purchases that are made. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Dan Ackerman.
So my apologies talking about procurement after a long meeting, but I promise I'll be fairly brief. So we want to show an overview. We want to talk about our procurement policy. We also have several internal controls in place, fraud prevention, and just a really good process just to make sure that we minimize any potential mistakes or any potential problems that could occur. So Emily, if you can go to the next slide, please. Oh, it's cut off a little bit. So we want to ensure that we purchase quality goods and services at competitive prices in a cost-effective manner while still providing a fair opportunity to all vendors, including disadvantaged business enterprises. We're a governmental agency. We want to make sure that the products we're getting, that they're quality. It is the taxpayers' money, so we want to make sure that that we are competitively getting some of the best prices that we can in order to get the best bang for our buck, if you will. We follow the Uniform Accounting Procedures Manual for county road commissions, so that when any finance person starts at a road commission, they receive the document. All of you are more than welcome to receive a copy. I must warn you, it's 344 pages. So purchasing is only a small portion of that. There's a lot of things about the accounting behind what we do. Other policies and procedures are included. So, but it is a great document for new finance folks, and really has a majority of the things that we do right in the document there. Okay, next slide. So just a kind of an overview. Obviously, the board approves the annual budget. And certainly we have the quarterly reviews, which we just participated in recently. And so, for instance, there are a couple of culvert projects that were added. And so we needed to explain why to the board, and then hopefully get the approval from the board to increase that line item. And that falls in line for anything. If we have a harsh winter and our salt budget is exceeding what the initial budget was, then we would explain why, and then ask the board to approve that. We try and use purchase orders whenever we can. Purchase orders are a great control, and typically involve several employees within a given department, and typically up to the department head. So you have all levels, including the highest level in the Department of Review. On occasion, we don't use purchase orders, but usually those have an okay to pay with whoever's submitting the bill with their signature and their date on it, and the date on it. Okay, next slide. Our procurement policy for materials, equipment, supplies, and contractual services usually requires 3 quotes. And there is a little bit of discretion. If it's below 20,000, it can be approved by the department director. Between 20 and 50, it's the managing director, and greater than 50 is would go to the board. Certainly, we have a lot of things that go to the board. What we call our bulk materials: salt, sand, equipment parts. So we do a really good job of any of those type of items, bringing it to the board. Just to make sure that there's an awareness there and that we're following the proper procedures. Okay, next slide. The professional services, and that is something in particular, our engineering department uses. Design, construction engineering. We use the MDOT quality-based selection process. And just reading that, it's a procurement process for the competitive selection of services under the most competent consultant/vendor is selected based on qualifications such as knowledge, skill, experience, and other project-specific factors rather than cost. And like I said, it's primarily used by engineering. Cheryl, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Again, this came about maybe 10 years ago with MDOT, and it was to really make sure that, I think we all recognize that cost is important, but it was making sure that you had the most qualified consultant providing the services that were being solicited at that point in time. So it isn't until you obviously have the opportunity to negotiate that contract once you've selected the most qualified consultant at that point in time. And if you cannot reach, negotiate the contract at that point, if the budget just isn't going to allow what that consultant's coming back at, then you would go to your second most qualified. But you're really trying to make sure that you're best served by the professional services. And it's a little bit different approach than the typical low bid, which is used for most procurement of specific items.
Cheryl, if I may, also, I'd like to add that the QBS, the quality-based selection process, is required when using federal funds to reimburse those services.
Correct.
So that is a requirement, and we use that on all of our engineering services, the QBS process.
Right. Anytime we're receiving reimbursement for any of our engineering services, we'd be required to go through this. So thank you, Matt, for adding that.
Great, thanks.
QBS was used in selecting the professional engineering and architecture services, the consultant for the Northeast Service Center as another example.
Yeah, like many of our processes, we adopt MDOT's means of doing business, and this is a great example of a well thought out, a well vetted process. As Matt indicated, staff's already required to go through it for a lot of our professional services. So it's we adopt a lot of those types of policies or procedures as part of our doing business because they've already been vetted. And it's something that staff has already become familiar with, and they make sense for our organization.
Is this different from being MDOT pre-qualified?
It is. This is an actual process that's outlined that we're required as opposed to being MDOT pre-qualified. Now, they often go hand in hand. For example, if we're looking for engineering services, let's say it's for construction engineering, especially when we're doing any state and federal work. But again, the Road Commission has mimicked our locally let work off similar to the MDOT work so that, again, it's a well-vetted process and staff is very familiar with that process. So inherently, you have to, in order, when you're going through that selection process, you would be using a MDOT pre-qualified, somebody who's already pre-qualified by MDOT for that service. Does that make sense?
But there's still the QBS process
Right.
in addition to being MDOT pre-qualified.
Right. So the MDOT pre-qualification is the initial hurdle. And then from there, the process, the QBS is the actual process staff is required to go through in order to determine which of these MDOT pre-qualified consultants would be selected.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions on that? Thanks, Cheryl and Matt. Next slide, please. Internal controls. I hear repeatedly we have a great staff, and I certainly don't disagree. People like Jeff Mann, Tracy Balkwell, Tiffany, Julie Nixon. I mean, we've got some great employees. But when we look at internal controls, we can't necessarily focus on the people. We need to look at the positions and make sure that we have good checks and balances in place. So one of the things, we have an annual audit with Plant Moran. They are obviously independent of the road commission. Besides looking at our finances and making sure everything's in order and that there are no material mistakes, they also audit our internal controls. And on occasion, certainly they've made recommendations to the board if there were any concerns that they had. So the state of Michigan also audits us every year because we are a state maintenance agency. And they also have looked at our internal controls as well. So it is actually, from my standpoint, it's kind of nice to see others independently review those and make recommendations, because as good as we think we have things, we can always improve on that. So some of the current controls that we have in place, we have a separation of duties. So for instance, a Jeff Mann, I'll use him as an example. He's in our stock room. He's not going to order, receive, and pay for a particular truck part, right? So there's going to be a separation of duties. Typically, he'll submit a purchase order, and eventually it'll get to Jim Harmon, Director of Operations, who will sign that. And then Tracy Balkwell in Accounts Payable will receive that. And then when the invoice comes, there'll be an okay to pay. And then Tracy will actually pay the vendor. So, you know, you don't want the same person involved from the very beginning to the end. So there's always daily communications between the finance clerk, who is Tracy Balkwell, who handles our accounts payable, and myself. With regards to any invoice questions, a lot of times they're minor. You know, this job number doesn't seem to match the project. You know, maybe it's exceeded the purchase order slightly. But we are in daily communication as far as if there's any issues with any vendor payments that we're making. And of course, we are on a bi-weekly pay cycle. So every 2 weeks, myself and Tracy review the check register, and anything that I'm unfamiliar with, or that, you know, maybe I want some more information on, we'll go through those, and then I will ask her, and certainly either she has the answer to it, or she may have to pull the actual invoice detail, and then we have a conversation about it. We also provide the check register to the board, and certainly the board has asked questions on several occasions as far as some of our vendor payments. So when we sign our checks, we use a secure electronic check signer that has a key and a password. So when Tracy goes to sign the accounts payable checks, she'll use the key and her own unique password. And then we also maintain a log of all the checks that were signed and written. So, you know, check 1 through 5 on this date, that Tracy authorizes that they were signed, and we date those. So we have a log of all the checks that go out of this agency. And of course, we retain check stubs, invoices, and purchase orders. And that serves a number of purposes. Occasionally we get questions as far as, you know, that check to HRC on June 15th, what was it regards to? So we can pull those, look at the documentation. Our auditors will, during the annual audit, they will pick invoices at random and trace that all the way back to where the bids from the board or where the authorizations were. So there's a number of reasons why we want to keep all that information. And of course, as all of you are familiar, the payroll and accounts payable vouchers are signed by 2 commissioners, myself, and then the managing director, and then that's provided to Washtenaw County as well. Next slide. As I mentioned previously, we use extensive use of purchase orders, and usually that requires the initial staff employee that is submitting that, typically up to the department director. If there are discrepancies with the invoices to the purchase orders, we investigate them. Again, could be a job number issue, it could be a quantity issue, price issue. We make sure that we reconcile all of those discrepancies before we would process it. And as I mentioned before, if there's no purchase order, typically we have an okay to pay with a higher level employee that's approving the payment. And one example, we have local share payments to MDOT for all of our projects, all our federal aid projects. And I okay to pay those. And I put the date on them as well, just so that, you know, if commissioners or Plant Moran, whoever can see that we have, that somebody is approving this payment. Okay, next slide. Fraud prevention, very, very, very important. So we are kind of going away from checks a little bit, but if someone were to get a hold of our blank check stock, which by the way is under lock and key, so if they were to get a hold of our check stock and attempt to make a copy, it would show voids all over that copy. So that's just a protection from that. Payroll for our employees is 100% direct deposit. So obviously that minimizes the checks that are being produced. For both payroll and accounts payable, we use what's called positive payee actually. And in my 25 plus years here, that's one of the most significant fraud preventions I've seen. And how that works is any check that goes out of this agency, we submit a file to KeyBank, who we use for our checking account. So we put the check date, who the check is written to, the dollar amount, all the significant information, and that goes out to KeyBank. And as checks are cleared, it gets compared to that file that we submit. And if there's any exception to that, so if the name is different, the amount, check numbers, it would show up in these daily exception emails that I receive from KeyBank. So usually when I receive those emails and it's on a daily basis from KeyBank for the cleared checks, the exceptions are 0, and that's what we want. Whenever it doesn't say 0, then I reach out to either Tracy or Lori Hackbarth, who handles our payroll, to determine was there an issue with how the checks were read, what's going on. And typically with the payee positive pay, sometimes it has a hard time reading the vendor name, or if it's a long vendor name, sometimes there's an issue with that, but those are investigated immediately. Next slide. So if there is an exception, and I reach out to Tracy in accounts payable, and she said that's not a check that we have written, or I don't recognize that vendor, then I have an opportunity to return that check. So I can tell KeyBank, don't pay that person, and then obviously we would investigate it further. So that is a really great way to catch anything as soon as possible. Also, we only have 2 corporate credit cards. We have no debit cards. Again, trying to minimize potential opportunities. Sometimes I think staff would prefer if maybe we had a few more credit cards, but everybody has been great as far as working with us on that. So you want to limit that as much as possible, especially debit cards. I read almost daily that an organization had a debit card for a finance person, and they they ended up getting some repairs done for their vehicle or what have you. Debit cards are kind of difficult to keep a hold of, so we've tried to limit that as much as possible. And also, we started paying our accounts payable vendors via ACH. We started that in 2019. Again, it's a more secure way of paying vendors as opposed to using a check. And Barb, we're working on it as far as trying to get more compliance. Tracy and I still want to have a big push on that. But, it seems like, maybe once a week or so, we're getting some new vendors. And we're trying to do it for any new partnerships that we have, that we're trying to encourage staff to push the ACH option with any potential new customers. Next slide, please. So trying to prevent fraud is something where you try and stay one step ahead of those that are trying to commit fraud. Unfortunately, they're getting better at things. So we can try to up the game as much as we can. There were a few fraud attempts that happened with our agency. There was one a few years ago where a person shows up at I believe a KeyBank branch and tried to cash a check. Unfortunately, the person was not a very smart criminal, because nothing matched. The check number didn't match. Who it was written to didn't match. The dollar amount didn't match anything. And so when the teller put it through, because they put it through this little system that they have, it flagged that it didn't meet our payee positive pay. The teller said, sir, I'm sorry, I can't cash this check for you. As a matter of fact, I can't give it back to you. That person was getting very agitated, and the teller was actually kind of fearing for their life at that point. But they made a copy of the check and gave it back to the individual. The bank surveillance, and so immediately when I found out about this, contacted law enforcement, contacted Washtenaw County. The bank surveillance got a nice picture of the individual, and apparently this person tried to do the same thing in Livingston County on the same day, and law enforcement was there waiting, and not sure where the person is now, but anyway, so basically that proved that it worked, and that, like I said, the payee positive pay has been one of the best fraud preventions that I've witnessed in my 25 plus years here. Next slide, please. And so, like I said, that's a kind of a brief overview, and just wondering if there's any questions.
Can someone remind me what the managing director's spending authority limit is?
Yeah, I believe that was $50,000. $50,000, yes.
Dan, what's our procedure for monitoring our commitment to disadvantaged business enterprises?
Rod, that's a good question. I don't know if we have a specific procedure on that per se. Certainly we want it to be fair and balanced. When we're getting bids. I think one challenge too is the type of industry we're in. Sometimes we're limited as far as the businesses that we can work with. But beyond that, I don't know if we have any tracking mechanism or anything like that. Cheryl, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Not for anything that's internally bid. Anything that we bid with the state of Michigan the state of Michigan is determining any of the DBE requirements associated with that project. And it is quite frequent that our construction projects have a DBE component to it.
So is there any way for us to monitor even whether our vendors are attempting to comply or incorporate, utilize, an increase in minorities and females, et cetera? I don't quite know what the definition of disadvantaged business enterprises is, but I'm assuming it's got some component of that.
Right. Well, I know what the state definition incorporates both minority and women-owned businesses, and I believe the disadvantaged business enterprise is the broader term that's used, but it's incorporating both. As far as internally, I'm not aware of that, Rod. That's something that we can certainly look at. I'm not sure what else involves on the state end of being able to manage a program like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd be interested, in pursuing that question a bit more, and also trying to determine the vendors that we use, whether they're attempting to utilize more women and minorities in their work process,
Well, certainly if they're registered as a state DBE, we would know that, or we have the ability to look that up, because I think that they have a list of meets that definition. Again, that's for the state bidding, but we've mimicked the state in a lot of our processes because we do not have the staff ability to sort of create our own from that. But we can certainly take a look at, and at least with respect to those vendors, as far as some of our other purchases, we can look into that. I'm not sure how we would quantify that.
Okay.
So Cheryl, is there a DBE directory list? I'm not familiar with whether someone has to qualify as a DBE and what does that take and where are they listed, so that we can make sure that when postings are issued, that there's a place where DBEs subscribe to, check regularly, have access to.
Yeah, my understanding is at the state level, specifically with the Michigan Department of Transportation, they have a very robust DBE program.
Okay.
It identifies those companies that have qualified, and I don't know what that what that process is, but those have gone through to become vetted, to become identified as a DBE through the state of Michigan, and therefore eligible to bid on work or to be a supplier or a vendor for work as a DBE. And how they convey that information or share that there's upcoming projects, that piece of it I don't know, but they do have a very involved program itself that I am aware of, because we've certainly worked with and have had to document that on any of our state or federal projects.
So locally, $50,000, $20,000 to $50,000 is a lot of money. So do you, when you're deciding to or getting bids, how do you go about? Do you just go to the Michigan state of Michigan site to look at the people they have vetted for the DBE, or how are you going about doing that?
So typically, if we're talking about something like a construction project, we would be using an MDOT pre-qualified contractor. So there are definitely established lists of who is pre-qualified, again, in the various types of work. If it's a signal job, there would be MDOT pre-qualified in traffic signal work. If it would be something that involved a lot of earth work, then they would be pre-qualified in that, or concrete, or whatever the type of service or work that we would be asking for. Again, that's a well-defined list. With respect to other purchases, we're looking primarily then at who would be the low bid on something, and we would be certainly looking at qualified, or who can supply specifically what it is that we are looking for. And it depends on, again, what that specific type or that part would be, or that, that particular component that we would be looking for.
Okay.
But we don't typically restrict, I mean, as far as if we're looking for work, the bids are publicly advertised, that type of thing, so that they're available for public scrutiny, but they may have to have that pre-qualification, again, if we're looking at a lot of the construction type work.
And they're publicly posted where? On our website for the work that's
It
50
can
and
be
under?
on our website, or it can be on, we also use a company known as Bid Express that we've been utilizing in order to publicly advertise as well.
I hope that in the future, at some point, at some working session, we can take a close and hard look at how we're doing in terms of making sure that we are utilizing as much as possible DBEs.
Sure, we can bring something up at a future working session. That's not a problem. I just wanted to make sure that the board was aware of, or at least comfortable with, the process that we currently have in place, since we've been receiving some questions on that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Not this time, not for me.
How
Well,
about a motion
Chair, I
to
think
adjourn?
that staff has concluded the information that we were hoping to share today.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
So
moved.
moved. Support.
I have motion, I have support. We'll start with Commissioner Barb Fuller. Aye or nay?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Green,
Yes.
Mr. Yamas,
Yes.
Commissioner McCollum,
Yes.
Commissioner Doug Fuller votes yes as well. We are adjourned. We'll see you back at 1 o'clock.